rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic.
Ano sabi mo ba? Nandun si Yumi Marshall. The 60th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. The chamber will be led in prayer by distinguished Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda.
Panginoon naming lumikha, kami ay lumalapit sa iyo na may papuri at pasasalamat. Isa pong biyaya ang pagkakataong mapaglingkuran po namin kayo at ang aming mga kababayan. Kami ay lumalapit sa inyo, humihingi ng inyong patuloy na patnubay upang magampanan namin ng tama ang aming sinumpaang tungkulin at hangarin sa ngalan niyo. Nais ko pong ialay ang panalangin na ito para sa lahat ng kababaihan bilang paggunita sa buwan ng kababaihan. Pagpalain niyo po ang lahat ng kababaihan na araw-araw ay nagsisikap na magdala ng kapayapaan at kaunlaran sa kanilang mga komunidad, tahanan at kanilang mga puso. Bigyan niyo po kami ng lakas upang patuloy na gawin ang mga layuning tinalaga ninyo sa amin. Idadalangin namin ang lahat ng kababaihan na nahaharap sa kaapihan at hindi pagkapantay-pantay. Tulungan niyo po kaming makita at harapin ang diskriminasyon sa kababaihan at labanan ang mga pang-aabuso sa lahat ng iba't ibang anyo nito, pisikal, emosyonal, psikolohikal o pang-ekonomikal. Ipinagdarasal namin na ang inyong kaginhawaan ay mapasa kanila. Tinataas din po namin sa inyo ang lahat ng kababaihang nabubuhay sa kawalan ng pag-asa sa kahirapan, karahasan, trafficking, pang-aalipin. Nawa ang liwanag ng inyong pag-ibig ay maghatid sa kanila ng pag-asa. Pinagdarasal din namin ang lahat ng kababaihan na nabubuhay sa takot sa kanilang mga kabiyak, ama, iba pang kalalakihan at mga puwersang kumokontrol sa kanilang buhay. Tulungan niyo po sila magkaroon ng katapangan at kapangyarihan para tumindig para sa kanilang mga sarili sa pamamagitan ng inyong walang hanggang pag-ibig at pananampalataya. Para sa aming mga mambabatas, kami ay humihingi ng dunong at gabay na maisulong namin ang mga patakaran at programa na angkop upang tugunan ang anumang uri ng paghihirap na nararanasan ng bawat kababaihan. Aming Panginoon, hindi kami karapat-dapat, ngunit kami po ay sumasamo sa inyo na gantipalaan mo ng tagumpay at dinggin ang panalangin ito. Amen.
Amen. And the Bulacan State University, Saring Himig, will lead us to the singing of the Philippine National Anthem. The group will also perform the Senate hymn Senadong Marangal, to be followed by the song Dugong Pilipino.
Magiliw, perla sa silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, guyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dinagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Pagkisap ng matawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at tarong niya kailan pang may di magdidili. Lupa ng araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya ng may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Puso at diwa ng Senado ang katwiran, isa batas ang mithing makabayan.
Pilipino'y maligayang nabubuhay sa kalinga ng paglay at katarungan. O Senado ng marangal at matatag, Senado ng marangal at matatag, malakas at di umuko sa dayuhan, pag ang bigkis nitong bansa'y nasa batas. Tuloy-tuloy at matuwid ang pag-unlad. Natanaw sa kalawakan, dela sa dulong silangan, kagandahay nababanag, bansang may paninindigan.
Lakas ng iyong damdamin isipan, kayamanan ang iyong kalikasan. Liwanag ang iyong katalinuhan, tagumpay ang dala
Sa pagkakaisa, ikaw ay dugo'y Pilipino, ay di pa rin susuko, sabay-sabay. Pagkat ikaw ay dugo Pilipino.
sa ihip ng hangin, huwag madalala sa dakilang bighin. Ika'y sumama sa piling ng amoy habang-mahabang lusuban ang hungin na may pag-ibig.
Pagsikat ng araw sa dakong silangan, sa lupang ito'y laging manawagan.
Sa Diyos at sa bayan, maglay ng pag-asa sa harap ng lahat.
Iharap ang bagong Pilipinas. Ikaw ay dugo'y Pilipino, ay di pa rin susuko, sabay-sabay. Pagkat ikaw ay dugo Pilipino.
nice. What a wonderful rendition of Dugong Pilipino. Maraming salamat po sa Bulacan State University, Saring Himig. Mga kababayan po ni Secretary
Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Hontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Ligarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, Senate President Subiri.
with 21 senators present, the chair declares presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, before we proceed, we'd like to extend our warmest greetings to our dear colleague who celebrated his 25th birthday, according to him, Mr. President. Last March 12, Sunday, Senator Raffy Tulfo. Happy victorious birthday, Senator Raffy Tulfo. And may I ask
Birthday.
for a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Yeah, to greet the good gentleman.
Just to
Session
greet
suspended
our
to greet
dear colleague.
our dear
Thank you.
colleague, happy birthday. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we proceed, we'd like to again put on record our sincerest thanks and gratitude to Bulacan State University Coral, headed by its conductor, Gian Rabang. Also, Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge some guests from the gallery, guests of our Senate President Zubiri, world-renowned boxer, our idol Yumir Marshall and his wife, Princess Marshall. They are here today, Mr. President. Guests of our dear colleague, Senator Gatchalian, Mayor Al Taculad of Duero, Bohol, Mr. Peter Barnett, Head of Energy Systems Asia, Ms. Jacqueline Tau of Transition Zero, guests of our dear colleague, Senator J.V. Ejercito from the Fraternal Order of Eagles, Mr. J.M. Llames, Mr. Francis Pantino, and Mr. Jack Fernandez. We welcome them in the Senate. Guests of Senator Mark Villar, local government of Caibiran, Biliran, headed by Mayor Rodessa Revita. Guests of Senator Bongo, local government of Hagonoy, Davao del Sur, headed by Mayor Jesus Dureza Jr. We welcome them, Mr. President, in this August chamber.
Welcome to your Senate, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 59th session Wednesday, March 8, 2023, and consider the same as approved.
If there is no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There be no objection. Secretary, please proceed with the reference of business.
Reference to business, messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 28 February 2023, it designated the following as members of the House panel, the Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum. As chairperson, Representative Yasser Alonto Balindong. As members, Representative Muhammad Dimapuro, Representative Bishaur Rahman Sia Alonto Adjong, Representative Munir N. Arbison Jr., Representative Lawrence R. Defensor.
Refer to Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 1 March 2023, it adopted House Concurrent Resolution Number 9, resolution granting consent to Mr. Delphin N. Lorenzana, Basis Conversion Development Authority Chairman and former Secretary of the Department of National Defense, is Mr. Gamaliel Asis Cordoba, Chairman of the Commission on Audit, and former Commissioner of the NTC, to receive the awards to be conferred on them by the Government of Japan for their contributions to Philippine-Japan relations, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 6 March 2023, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. RBH number 6, resolution of both houses calling for a constitutional convention to propose amendments to or revision of the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines.
Refer to the Committees on Constitutional Amendments, Electoral Reforms, and People's Participation.
7, House Bill number 7241, an act strengthening the procedure
Reforms, People's Participation.
an act institutionalizing the transition of the government to e-governance in the digital age, creating for the purpose the Philippine Infrastructure Management Corporation and appropriating funds therefor.
Refer to Committees on Science, Technology, Civil Service, and Finance.
7354, an act establishing evacuation centers in every city and municipality and appropriating funds therefor.
To the Committees on National Defense, Public Works, and Finance.
7027, an act providing preferential appointment to appointed officers and employees holding valid appointments to the new positions in the approved staffing pattern following a government reorganization, amending for the purpose Section 4 of RA 6656.
The Committees on Civil Service and Professional Regulation.
7208, an act declaring January 22 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to be known as the National Farmers' Day.
To the Committee on Agriculture, Food, and Agrarian Reform.
7209, an act declaring the fourth Thursday of November of every year as National Thanksgiving Day.
Committee on Civil Service, Government Organization, Labor and Human Resources.
7292, an act creating a VAT refund mechanism for non-resident tourists, adding for the purpose a new section 112-A to the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
7311, setting standards for the contracting of loans and grants with bilateral and multilateral partners, amending for the purpose section 2347 and 9 of Republic Act 8182 as amended by RA 8555, otherwise known as the Official Development Assistance Act of 1996.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Finance and Ways and Means.
7355, an act establishing the Negros Island region and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Local Government, Finance.
3092, establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Liloy, province of Zamboanga del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore. 7295, an act establishing a central multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Arles, Iloilo, and appropriating funds therefore. 7296, establishing a coastal aquaculture center to support and rehabilitate the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, Northern Mindanao, brackish water aquaculture fish farm in the municipality of Lala, Lanao del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore. 7297, establishing a satellite multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of San Fernando, Camarines Sur, and appropriating funds therefore. 7299, establishing a satellite multi-species marine hatchery in Pasacao, Camarines Sur, appropriating funds therefore. And 7300, establishing a satellite multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Minalaba, Camarines Sur, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Agrarian Reform and Finance.
6932, an act declaring La Mesa Dam Eco Park located in Barangay Fairview, Quezon City, a tourism destination, and House Bill number 6372, declaring the ruins of Cota de San Jose located in the municipality of Corcuera, Romblon, a tourism site.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
7302, an act declaring the province of Marinduque as the home of the Moriones Festival.
To the Committee on Tourism.
7304, an act declaring Banga Caves located in the municipality of Ragay, Camarines Sur, an ecotourism destination.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment, Natural Resources and Finance.
7235, converting the Cebu Technological University Dumanhug Extension Campus in the municipality and Dumanhug, province of Cebu, into a regular campus of the Cebu Technical University to be known as the Cebu Technical University Dumanhug Campus, and appropriating funds therefore.
To Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education and Finance.
7303, establishing the Mindanao State University Lanao del Norte Agricultural College Arboretum in Barangay Ramain, municipality of Sultan Naga de Maporo, province of Lanao del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, Higher Technical Vocational Education and Finance.
7156, an act establishing a satellite office of the Department of Labor and Employment in the municipality of Rodriguez Rizal, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Labor and Employment and Finance.
7234, an act renumbering the Cebu 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th District Engineering Offices to conform and correspond respectively with the numbering of the legislative districts and the province of Cebu, thereby repealing Republic Acts numbered 9043 and 9218.
To the Committee on Public Works.
Letter from the House informing the Senate on 28 February 2023, it adopted House Concurrent Resolution number 10. Concurrent resolution establishing and maintaining an integrated and secure digital legislative management system for the Congress of the Philippines to be known as the e-Congress, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
To the Archives.
Letter from the House informing the Senate on 1st March 2023, it adopted Senate Concurrent Resolution number 7 as amendment to House Concurrent Resolution number 10, establishing and maintaining an integrated and secure digital legislative management system for the Congress of the Philippines to be known as the e-Congress.
To the Archives. There's
Additional
additional reference to business.
additional reference to business bills on first reading. Senate Bill number 1981, an act mandating all barangays to create a registry of skilled workers to provide funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Labor and Employment, Local Government.
1982, an act declaring the Malabon Heritage District in the city of Malabon a National Historical Cultural Heritage Zone to appropriate funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Lapid.
Committee on Culture and Arts, Tourism and Finance.
1983, an act declaring Sitio Timuga and Barangay Buroon in the city of Iligan, province of Lanao del Norte, an ecotourism zone to be known as the Timuga Ecotourism Zone and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Tourism and Finance.
1984, separating the Jose Abad Santos National High School Tabayon Extension in Barangay Tabayon, Jose Abad Santos, province of Davao Occidental, from Jose Abad Santos National High School, converting it an independent national high school to be known as Tabayon National High School and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Rules.
1985, an act creating Barangay Pag-asa in the municipality of Calamansig, province of Sultan Kudarat by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Rules.
1986, promoting gender-neutral uniforms in schools, colleges, and universities by Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations.
1987, providing for the formulation and institutionalization of a comprehensive infrastructure development master plan by Senator Villanueva.
Committee on Economic Affairs and Finance.
Resolution, PS Resolution 538, directing the Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change and other appropriate committees of the Senate to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Oriental Mindoro oil spill and its effects on the environment, food security, and livelihood of the people in the affected areas by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Environment and Natural Resources. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, this Mayor Joseph Kaingoy of Miripi, Biliran, Mayor Annalisa Kwan of Guluan, Eastern Samar, Vice Mayor Aubrey Fondevilla, Cuera, Romblon, Vice Mayor Diven Dimaala of Odjongan, Romblon. Guest of our dear colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino.
To the Senate, the gentlemen, ladies from Eastern Samar and Romblon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this juncture, and with the permission of the body, I move to consider proposed Senate Resolution number 494, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 256, and for the Secretary to read the title of the measure. This is the resolution congratulating and commending Yumir Felix Marshall.
Please proceed if there's no objection from our colleagues.
Proposed Senate Resolution number 494, resolution congratulating and commending Yumir Felix Marshall for his fourth straight professional boxing victory after conquering a middleweight match in San Antonio, Texas, USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I be allowed, Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, Mr. President?
The Majority
If I
Leader is
may.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, it is my honor and privilege to sponsor proposed Senate resolutions number 256 and 494, congratulating and commending Tokyo Summer Olympics bronze medalist Yumir Felix Marshall for his third and fourth straight professional boxing victories after conquering middleweight matches in the United States of America. Mr. President, on October 8, 2022, Yumir won against American Steven Picardo in a six-round middleweight match held in Carson, California. This is despite the accidental headbutt cut he suffered above his right eye during the second round of the fight. Yumir showcased his superior boxing skills to shut down his opponent. And just last month, Mr. President, he won again against Argentinian Ricardo Ruben Villalba in an 8-round middleweight bout in San Antonio, Texas, USA. Indeed, Yumir once again showcased to the world the exceptional skills and talent of the Filipino athlete. Isa po siyang inspirasyon hindi lang sa ating mga Pilipino, mga kapwa niya boksingero, kundi po sa mga libo-libong atleta at milyong-milyong kabataang Pilipino na nagsisikap na makamit ang kanilang mga pangarap. Muli, Ginoong Pangulo, we'd like to congratulate our kababayan, my fraternity brother, Yumir. Mabuhay ka, and we will cheer for you in all your next matches. Salamat, Ginoong Pangulo, dear colleagues, and may God bless us all.
Yes, thank you very much, Majority Leader. If I may also insert to the records my sponsorship speech for the gentleman from Mindanao, Yumir Marshall. We'd like to congratulate him on a job well done, again, making the country proud. Daghan kay salamat, Yumir. And continue the good works that you do for your people in Zamboanga and all throughout the Philippines. Mabuhay ka.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for co-authoring also this resolution that this representation filed. Mr. President, at this juncture, Senator Bongo, our chairperson of the Committee on Sports, would like to co-sponsor the resolution. I move that he be recognized, Mr.
Our
President.
distinguished colleague from the great city of Davao and Batangas is recognized.
Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, as chairman of the Senate Committee on Sports, it is my distinct honor and privilege to stand before you today to express my support and sponsor the Senate resolution congratulating and commending Yumir Felix Marshall for his fourth straight professional boxing victory after conquering a middleweight match in San Antonio, Texas, USA. Yumir Felix Marshall's recent win in an 8-round middleweight bout at Alamodome in San Antonio, Texas, USA is nothing short of impressive. Marshall has once again proven his exceptional skills and talent as a boxer by achieving his second knockout in the professional ranks after stopping the more experienced opponent just 48 seconds into the second round. This victory of Yumir Marshall speaks volumes about his dedication and commitment to the sport. Kahit na nakakas daw yung kamay niya sa kanan, sabi niya okay lang daw mag-cast na naman daw yung kaliwa, kukunin raw niya ang ginto. Kailan? Sa 2024 Olympics, sabi niya, bahala na raw mag-cast uli yung kaliwang kamay niya, basta makuha raw niya yung ginto para sa ating bayan. Taga Mindanao rin po ito, si Marshall from Zamboanga. Marshall has brought home several victories for the Philippines, including the gold medal at the Southeast Asian Games and a bronze medal at the Asian Games, among others. As the chairman of the Senate Committee on Sports, I believe sports play a crucial role in our society as it is not only a form of entertainment and recreation, but also a means of fostering unity and national pride. As such, I place a great importance on the development of sports in our country. Through our combined efforts, we will be able to continue to inspire and empower our Filipino athletes to achieve greater heights and bringing honor and glory to our country. Rest assured that I will continue to always stand behind our athletes and support them in their pursuit of excellence. Yumir, once again, I would like to extend my sincerest congratulations on your historic accomplishment. Your unwavering determination and dedication have set a remarkable example for all of us, demonstrating what can be achieved through hard work and perseverance. We look forward with great anticipation to your future achievements and continued success. Mabuhay ka, Yumir. Nandito lang po kami na sa Senado na handang sumuporta sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay ka, Yumir. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
President.
much, distinguished
Mr. President, Senator Bong Revilla would also like to co-sponsor the measure, and he requested that his co-sponsorship speech be inserted into the records.
Thank you very much. We'll take note.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that all present members of the Senate be made co-authors of this resolution.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, no other member wishes to interpolate or propose amendments to the measure. I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 256, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 494, subject to style.
There being no objection to the motion, majority floor leader, proposed Senate Resolution number 494, taking consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 256, is hereby adopted subject to style. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we ask and invite our kababayan, Yumir, and his wife to proceed to the podium for the photo opportunity.
Yes,
Thank you,
session
Mr. President.
suspended.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1841 under Committee Report number 21, strengthening the conservation and protection of Philippine cultural heritage. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we are in the period of interpellation. I now move that we resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda, and to continue with the interpellation, Senate Minority Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel. I so move, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleagues, the Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda, to sponsor, and my distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III, to interpolate.
Thank you, Mr. President, and with the permission of our sponsor, if we can continue with our interpellation. Our last,
Yes, Mr. President, it's my pleasure to be interpellated. And it is all an educational process for all of us to enhance the measure.
yes, during our last interpellation session, Mr. President, we were very productive. I think we disposed of, or at least we discussed three of the 4 points that this representation would like to raise in connection with this bill, which we will just call referred to by its short name, the Cultural Mapping Bill, Mr. President. And the fourth item that we purposely left out during the last interpellation session was about this protection of visual sightlines, core and buffer zones, which we found on page 16, line 16 of the bill, of the measure, Mr. President. And during the last session, we mentioned that we noticed 3 ways in which this concept was expressed or has been expressed in the bill. So there's visual sight line, there's visual corridor and or line of sight, and the third one is visual impact. We welcome, actually, Mr. President, we welcome the introduction of this new concept, which will be a new protection that we want to extend to culturally important properties. The challenge is how to avoid being too broad that it will be susceptible to a constitutional challenge under the overbreadth doctrine, or too vague, kasi related naman itong dalawa, that it will be susceptible to a constitutional challenge of being void for being vague, the void for vagueness doctrine. And then we also want to avoid a blanket delegation or a delegation of blanket authority, Mr. President, because this might also be susceptible to a constitutional challenge based on the undue delegation of legislative power. Plus, there are some other issues that we would raise since this is really a new concept, a new protection that we want to extend to culturally important properties, because I think a recent Supreme Court case has declared that there is still no legal basis to protect the visual sightline or the visual impact. So our other constitutional concerns are whether if we put a burden on properties which we deem to be affecting the visual corridor of a culturally important property, are we not actually taking, if not the entire property, but some rights, rights related to ownership, Mr. President, because per our research, the right to ownership of property has what we call component rights. So one would be use ottendi, the right to enjoy. Use provendi, the right to receive fruits. Use accessiones, the right to the accessories. Use abutendi, the right to consume a thing by use. Use disponendi, the right to alienate, encumber, transform, or even destroy the thing owned. Use vindicandi, the right to recover possession of property based on a claim of ownership. Use possidendi, the right to possess the property. So, in short, Mr. President, that the concept of taking of property is not limited only to dispossessing the owner of his ownership over a property. It can be a limitation to any of those component rights of ownership. So I think I have summarized, Mr. President, at least not less than 4 possible constitutional issues which we can anticipate can be raised against a not so accurate or a very imperfect phrasing of this new concept of visual impact, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Let me just cite or stress, Mr. President, that visual sightline will not impinge on the right of the owner to all those aspects because this will relate only to those of historical significance. But you are correct that broad powers on the government agency that will be vested with the power to declare a property within the sightline could be misconstrued, could be abused. We don't know. So it must be very specific. Having said that, Mr. President, I have an amendment in Section 9 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I will no longer read it into the record because what I will do, and I hope that the good minority leader agrees, I think, just so that it's on the record as well, because we agreed already that I will delete this from the proposed measure, but I, together with the NCCA and your office and the other co-authors of the measure, including Senator Cayetano, would draft a standalone measure so that the bill on sightline for further protection can be can be in a separate bill. So just an example, let's say, of protected view or protected vistas in other country. Let me just put on record. For example, St. Paul's Cathedral, I'm told here in London, and there's Brooklyn Heights Promenade in New York, the state capitol in Austin, Texas, etc. But this is in other Western countries. So based on our discussion during the brief break, I agree to your suggestion because this is a very interesting subject matter which will protect historical cultural sites, taking into consideration recent years where important historical and cultural properties were, can't find a better word, photobombed, where the structures were not respected, so to speak, that there were new structures that got in the way, to put it very simply. And so because it is, you're correct, it is complicated, however important and interesting, I am agreeing to your recommendation to draft a special standalone bill so that this can be further discussed and enhanced. And so we will focus on the cultural mapping, which all of us agree with.
So we welcome this development, Mr. President. But just to make it very clear, no, we are together with the sponsor in entertaining the idea of extending a protection based on the visual impact or visual corridor. We will have to agree on the terminology.
Sightline,
Sightline. But then, of course, we have to, since this is a new concept, and it is not only the culturally important property which is affected, but some properties will be
Around
affected and they are not culturally important. Diba? All of a sudden, they're just affected because of the protection given to the culturally important property. So the sponsor has given us some areas or jurisdictions where they have this. It can be done, but we have to look at their approach, what is their
Yes.
approach. And siguro, the closest analogy is sa airport, kaya nga gawin eh. There is also a
height
burden on
restriction.
property, an easement on property, a burden on property along the approach or the take-off line of the runway. Ganun yun eh. So it can be done,
Yes.
but we just have to be more detailed and more accurate to avoid the four possible constitutional challenges, Mr. President.
If I may just mention a portion of the amendments we worked on over the weekend, although I will not insist on this being part of the bill. The NCCA board may include visual sightline protection in its declarations in order for the commission to exercise its power to establish visual sightline protection. And this will include a heritage impact assessment with public consultations that will be conducted. National significance and publicly recognized value of the visual sightline must be established. So this can be a standalone bill. And we can work on this and do consultations and craft and draft a standalone measure. So I agree with you, but we worked, just to let you know, we worked on our assignment over the weekend, but then based on our conversation, it's more expedient that we delete this and have a special bill for this.
Nonetheless, Mr. President, I'd like to thank our sponsor for bringing this to our attention. Na importante ito, pagtuunan natin ng pansin, pagbuhusan natin ang brain power natin, how to be able to execute this or implement this new protection that we want to give to culturally important properties. So yun lang, but
Yes.
yun lang, agreement natin, it will take time eh. So but cultural mapping, happy bill.
Happy bill.
Happy bill. I mean,
Napasa na-
happy in the sense na it's
Controversial.
not that controversial, and we do not anticipate too many possible constitutional arguments against it, Mr. President. So
And it's also been passed on third reading, several congresses already in the House.
And maybe we can also add to the discussion, when you do the site mapping, if what sightline
Visual
mapping and coming up with the determination on how that will be computed later on, maybe you could also look at the possibility of limiting it to certain sites. Kasi mahirap
yes.
naman.
I think,
Certain sites. Kasi if you make it all over the Philippines, how will you now declare, what if an upcoming town, di ba, wants to also rebuild and modernize, and then all of a sudden, there's a declaration that in this plaza, all around this statue, you cannot build anywhere.
May I explain that?
So that's why, I'm just giving inputs for the next discussion
Sure.
on that bill. Maybe we can really put in the historically significant sites that maybe are in a short list of the the National
NCCA.
NCCA.
In fact, Mr. President, in the present form, it is only historically significant sites, not all grade 1. In fact, only selected. Your suggestion to make it such is already incorporated
Okay.
in the proposed bill. However, I also take into consideration the concern of the good minority leader, and as we agreed, we will pass the happy bill into law
Yes.
without the contentious issues, so that we pass this measure first, so that the NCCA and the LGUs can already work together, and then we draft and craft the heritage impact assessment with the sightline and others, and see how it is done in other jurisdictions, so that also it would not be possibly challenged by the SC. Okay.
So I think, Mr. President, that's a logical and appropriate,
Thank you.
acceptable approach, Mr. President. So with that, that's the last point that I want to interpolate on. And since the sponsor says we will separate it from the cultural mapping bill, actually, if we could find the formula acceptable for this visual impact bill, it becomes an additional protection. It is also a happy bill, Mr. President. Yun, pero pag-aralan lang natin mabuti na one thing that we also want to avoid, Mr. President, under your watch would be, ang ating catchphrase ngayon is the unintended consequences, Mr.
Yes.
President. So that's what we're going
And also not the quantity, but the quality of the
Quality,
measure that we will pass.
So with that, Mr. President, I think our strategy, our procedure is very clear. So I'd like
Thank
to
you very
thank the
much, Madam.
sponsor for her patience and for accommodating some of our suggestions. One final point. We also changed the definition of cultural mapping. Are we going to change, Madam Sponsor? The definition of cultural mapping, we will change it, right? We will
It's
we will
been
improve
changed
it.
already.
Yes, in the period of
Yes.
amendments. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the wise and enlightened queries where I also learned and I studied because of the minority leader's interpellations. And I'm grateful to him. And because of that, we will have a stronger law with the heritage impact assessment and the sightline when we discuss it further. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, with that and there being no member who wish to interpolate, I move that we close the period of interpellations and debates. So move, Mr.
There'll
President.
be no more more interpollators, rather. The motion is approved.
Thank you,
No
Mr.
objection.
President. Mr. President, as agreed upon by both parties, Mr. President, we will move now to suspend the deliberation of this measure and proceed tomorrow with the amendments, Mr. President.
There'll be no objection. Motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Shall we be taking up the Bill of Rights or Rights of Taxpayers? It's an interesting measure.
Suki. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1806 under Committee Report number 20. This is the bill on the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and Obligations Act.
There'll be no objection. Motion is approved.
Mr. President,
Sponsor,
Mr. President,
we recognize the sponsor.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status, Mr. President, of the bill is that we have sponsored the measure and now I will move now that we open the period of interpellations and debate and recognize the sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to interpellate our minority leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. I so move,
My
Mr. President.
distinguished colleague, Chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, to sponsor the measure, and we recognize our distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of our sponsor, I'd like to start our interpellation on this very important bill, Mr. President. This has a potential to be a landmark law, Mr. President.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President, we'll be more than happy to receive question, and thank you for the support from our good minority leader.
Mr. President, we are now discussing this bill, which is a substitute bill, which bears the title, An Act Providing for the Bill of Rights and Obligations of Taxpayers, creating the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. So mabigat po itong panukalang batas po na ito. Ililista po natin ang mga karapatan ng mga taxpayer, mga Pilipinong nagbabayad ng buwis. Tapos, tayo po ay gagawa ng isang opisina na parang PAO, parang Public Assistance Office para sa mga taxpayer. Mabigat po ang layunin ng ating panukalang batas. Kaya ang tanong ko po bakit po ito naisip? May clamor ba sa ating mga kababayan para po sa ganitong klaseng panukalang batas?
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Ginoong Pangulo, kakaiba siya at sabi nga ho ng ating minority leader, pwede maging landmark bill, pero hindi ho siya iba. meaning there are a lot of countries, no, first world countries and developed nations who are implementing this type of legislation, meaning legislating or administratively issuing Bill of Rights for their taxpayers, as well as creating an office to protect the interests of our taxpayers. And para po masagot ho natin ang katanungan ng ating minority leader, ang basehan ho nito ay galing po sa data na pinadala po sa amin ng ARTA. At pakita ko lang po sa slide, no? In 2019, makikita ho natin yung top 10 most complained agencies. Lumalabas in 2019, the second highest is Bureau of Internal Revenue, and then the sixth is Bureau of Customs. In 2020, let me just flash. The second highest is Bureau of Internal Revenue. Number 8 is Bureau of Customs. In 2021, ganun rin po, no? Bureau of Internal Revenue number 3, number 7 Bureau of Customs. And then in 2020, it's Bureau of Internal Revenue. Nawala naman po yung customs. But nevertheless, just to emphasize that Bureau of Customs and the Bureau of Internal Revenue has always remained top 10 most complained agencies. And the complaints stem from corruption, abuse, bureaucracy, and a lot of these complaints come from our very own customers who are our taxpayers. So the logic here, Mr. President, is to, number one, protect the rights of our taxpayers, because obviously our revenue collecting agencies are the most complained. And then number two, to prevent corruption and abuse from these said agencies, Mr. President. So this is basically, no, in simple terms, the logic why we deemed it necessary to protect the rights of our taxpayers.
Pero para sa akin po, so just looking at the number of complaints, parang mababa, 28 complaints in 1 year. But these are only coursed through the ARTA.
Yes,
So,
tama ho.
red
Tama.
tape ang basic ano nito.
Iba-iba na ho, no? Based on our information, red tape karamihan, pero mayroon rin abuse, because with red tape comes with abuse and corruption. Tama ho kayo, Minority Leader. Iba pa ho yung nakukuha ng DOF, iba pa yung nakukuha ng BIR itself, iba pa ho yung nakukuha ng CSE, iba pa ho yung nakukuha ng ombudsman, no?
At iba pa rin yung mga naririnig natin na dinidiretso sa atin na mga ugong-ugong, siyempre.
Oho.
Mr. Sponsor.
Correct. Alam naman ho natin, our taxpayers will not complain. No? They will not complain their own tax collector dahil pwede ho silang mabalikan. Doon po sa mga naglalakas loob and doon po sa mga agencies with electronic means, ito po yung mga like ARTA, dito po sila nagko-complain.
Tama po yun. So kung ito pong Taxpayer Bill of Rights, ito po ay pangkaraniwan na sa mga first world countries. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President, and I have a slide on that, Mr. President, for easy reference.
Other countries.
Yeah. On slide 15. So most of the, actually not even developed nations, Mr. President, even developing nations such as Cambodia, Chile, India, Laos, they have either a legislated taxpayer bill of rights or administrative issuance.
Okay.
So these are the countries we have identified, and some of them also have some call it taxpayers ombudsman, some call it taxpayers advocate. So iba-iba po, but the concept are pretty much the same. So ito mo yung mga bansang meron pong either legislated or administrative issuance
Legislated.
na taxpayers bill of rights po.
In coming up with our draft, Mr. President, did we use any model?
Yes, thank you very much for that, question, Mr. President, yes, in fact, we did. We used the U.S. model, Mr. President, because the U.S. model, first of all, they're one of the earliest countries who adopted a taxpayers' rights concept, and they're also one of the earliest countries which also adopted a taxpayers advocate office. No? So we use the American as the model, Mr. President. In fact, our very own STSRO has been in contact with a non-profit organization in the U.S. called the Taxpayers' Rights Center. No? And in the U.S., the protection of taxpayers' rights is very, very vibrant, Mr. President.
Yes, and I've heard that tax paying or filing the tax return in the US is very convenient and very easy to do. And if they want assistance, they can get assistance.
Yes, Mr. President, particularly for small businesses. No? In the U.S., they protect the interests of small businesses because the small businesses, in terms of numbers, is one of the biggest in the number of taxpayers that they have.
Samantalang dito sa atin, Mr. President, ito experience ko nga eh. Nung manual pa tayo, yung mag-fill up ka ng forms manually, kaya kong gawin yun eh. Ngayon na nag-online na, hindi ko na alam paano gawin eh. Tapos I think pagka incomplete yung form mo, hindi tatanggapin eh. So, tapos wala naman, hindi mo alam saan ka nagkamali. Wala ka actually matanungan kung saan ka nagkamali. So, in the US, what's the role played by their tax advocate to assist a taxpayer with such an experience which I just mentioned, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. From what I read in their website, no, the National Taxpayer Advocate, what they call it, it provides it provides a lot of services. Let me just pull out that slide of services. May mga slide of services, Carla. Yung pina-screenshot ko sa'yo.
Hindi siya in-order.
Where's that?
Then yung meron.
Ito independent form, but hindi.
Ito na yung
Yung mga powers ng services that National Taxpayer Advocate of. Yung pina-screenshot ko sa'yo.
so paano pa rin?
Ano nga nadagdag? Siguro man.
Yan, yan.
Bangga mo sana. Binabangga.
Yeah, but there are mga services na.
Mag-check.
Anyways, Mr. President, I'll get back to you, but typically,
Side by side.
go to their website. May mga icons. Typically, the services that they offer, Mr. President, is advice. They also receive complaints. And they also provide suggestion to their tax authorities. And they also provide suggestion to Congress in order to improve legislation, Mr. President. But the services that they provide their taxpayer is education, advice, and a venue for their taxpayer to complain. We'll pull out the
Yes.
exact.
Does the U.S. Tax advocate help individual taxpayers?
Yes, Mr. President.
In filling up their ITRs?
In the form of education, Mr. President, in the form of
Not on a specific per request, per person basis, Mr. President?
as far as I understand, no, in their website, they entertain directly the complaints of their taxpayers, and then they investigate and they refer to the tax authorities for action. But in terms of filling up information,
Filing the ITR?
the filing is through their education advocacy.
Okay. And yeah, and hoping that the taxpayer learned something from their educational campaign. But what is our But what is our plan here, Mr. President? Our in the Philippine ONTA. Is the ONTA expected to help the Filipino taxpayer on a per taxpayer basis and a per problem basis, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, the key functions of the ONTA, the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate, is number one, to assist the public in their tax queries and concerns relative to taxes. Number two, represent taxpayers and assist, initiate, intervene as may be applicable in tax cases, complaints, proceedings after due evaluation. And then number three, engage in regular information, education, communication programs for all taxpayers on tax laws, tax rules, regulations, circulars, and issuances, Mr. President. So those are the top three functions of the ONTA, Mr. President. But we also included in the bill, Mr. President, that the taxpayer should the taxpayers is experiencing financial difficulty, Mr. President. So in other words, they will prioritize those who are marginalized, those who are having problems, for example, in their assessment that can lead to bankruptcy. They will prioritize the micro, small, and medium enterprises, Mr. President. So, in other words, priority will be given to those entities and persons who are encountering financial difficulty.
But that's prioritization, Mr. President. But theoretically, the ONTA is there to help everyone.
Yes, theoretically, they're there to help everyone, but they will prioritize those who are encountering financial difficulty. And the reason for that, Mr. President, for example, you're a big company, no? And you were assessed, and you don't agree with the assessment. Theoretically, you can go to ONTA for tax queries, for information, to educate you. But in terms of representation, the ONTA will now study first if you are qualified under their prioritization procedures.
Yes, but if they have sufficient manpower, then
Yes,
they
Mr.
should extend the assistance to you.
Theoretically, yes, Mr. President. Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, Mr. President. So, is ONTA our mechanism to get a second look, second opinion on the tax liability being charged the taxpayer, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, that's precisely the wisdom out of ONTA. No? There are three benefits of ONTA, Mr. President. Let me just get my notes. The theoretical benefits of ONTA, number one, Mr. President, it's a form of mediation. No? And you're absolutely correct, Minority Leader. If I'm a taxpayer and if I don't agree with the assessment, instead of filing a case against government, I will go to ONTA and get a second opinion on my assessment. So ONTA can render an opinion favorable to government or favorable to you, but it will avoid litigation expenses because ONTA can render that second opinion. It can also curb corruption, Mr. President, because as we all know, there are abusive tax collectors, Mr. President. So those abusive tax collectors will have to think many times because a fellow government agency will now review the assessment that the tax collector implemented or tax collector is collecting. So, and if the tax collector is found to be abusive or the assessment is baseless by the ONTA, it can be a basis to file charges against the tax collector. So, Mr. President, it's a mechanism to curb corruption. It's a mechanism to perform mediation. It's also a mechanism to boost confidence in the system because government itself is providing the check and balance between the tax revenue agencies, Mr. President.
And when we talk about the tax collecting agencies, the bill mentions not less than three. So we have the BIR, we have the customs, we have the local governments, and then there is praise other tax collecting agencies. So how many all in all, Mr. President, how many decisions of agencies are reviewable by ONTA?
We've identified here the three major agencies, Mr. President.
Can fall under the other tax collecting.
Okay. The three major, Mr. President, is of course the BIR, the Bureau of Customs, the local government agencies. But we also have minor tax collecting agencies such as the FIBIDEC under their charter, Mr. President, and also TIEZA, Mr. President, under their charter. But the three major ones, no, BIR, Customs, and the LGUs, they comprise probably almost 99% of the taxes being collected by government.
And should we create in the future PVDEC-like or TSA-like entities, they will be covered by this measure, Mr. President?
Yes, it's covered, Mr. President. I understand from one of our hearings that FIBIDEC is collecting real property taxes, Mr. President, under their charter. And a portion of that goes to the local government units. Nevertheless, it's a taxing power by a GOCC, Mr. President.
That's a PVDEC in Misamis Oriental.
In Misamis Oriental,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President.
So that's why it's good that we're talking about the tax collecting agencies, Mr. President, because I want to go to the number. How many taxpayers do we have from per record of the BIR, record of the customs, record of the local government units? Kasi ang iniisip ko, if they all, theoretically, they're all under the coverage of the ONTA, therefore they can really run to ONTA and ask for help. Kakayanin ba ni ONTA?
Yes.
Lahat po ito sa given the number, Mr. President.
Actually, Mr. President, that's why we put the prioritization mechanism there, Mr. President, to prioritize those who are experiencing financial difficulty, Mr. President. Just to answer your question, Mr. President, our registered taxpayers just in BIR is about 26 million taxpayers, Mr. President.
26 million.
26 million. 26.8 to be exact.
And then in customs,
Ito po yung
I think it's variable. Siguro.
exempt from paying income taxes. So income taxes alone nasa 26.8.
Yeah.
Kayanin ba ni ONTA?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, siguro pa, if you can just get the figures for, ay lapat pagdating pa sa local government units.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ilan yan? Even the barangay is a tax collecting unit, Mr. President?
The barangays is not, Mr. President.
Not, so-
It's the local government units that collect and then gives to
Okay,
barangays
so
through the RPT, Mr.
so
President.
around 1,500 municipalities plus 80 plus provinces.
Provinces.
And how many highly urbanized cities, Mr. President? I have already
About
forgot.
40 something.
40 lang ba?
The highly urbanized? 40. The last count? 33 to be exact,
33.
Mr. President.
So-
33.
So yun po, lahat yun sila. And then may iba-iba ring number of... kakayanin po ba, Mr. President?
That's why-
Ilang bang manpower kakailangan natin for ONTA? And then later on, we'll talk about the budget for ONTA.
Yeah.
For it to theoretically be able to anong tawag ito? Service the clientele that they are intended to serve, Mr. President.
Yeah. That's why, Mr. President, it's important to prioritize, Mr. President, and even in other jurisdiction, they prioritize those who experience financial difficulty or financial harm in other jurisdiction. So it's important to prioritize so that those who are experiencing abuse, and that abuse can lead to closure of their business or seizure of their business, they have to be prioritized, Mr. President. So that's why we included in, let me just find the exact provision.
Yung sa mga to.
Yeah.
Page 4.
Power naman yun.
Yung
Page 4, line 16, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. Page 4, line 16.
Yes, financial difficulty. But yes, Mr. President, talking about this financial difficulty, that is a qualification for the ONTA to provide representation to the taxpayer. Siguro ito, meron na siguro itong issue eh. There must be siguro some sort of a legal issue. But then when we go to page 7, line 8, which is section 8, the powers of the ONTA, ang nakasulat dito, assist the public in their tax queries and concerns relative to taxes. So potentially 20 sa BIR pa lang 26.8 million clientele na po ito.
Yes,
Because
Mr.
there's no
President.
prioritization when it comes to assistance, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, we're cognizant of that, Mr. President, and we're hoping that they will not encounter arbitrary assessments. If the taxpayer will agree to the assessment and they pay their taxes accurately, then they will not encounter any problems with the revenue authorities, Mr. President. Those who think that they are being abused and the assessment are not founded on their filings, then they can go to ONTA, Mr. President.
Are the ONTA services expected to be free of charge, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, this line of questioning, Mr. President, I have to ask because I want this to succeed actually.
Yeah.
So, if it's free of charge and anybody can ask for help for ONTA, would not everybody now dispute each and every tax assessment imposed on him or her, Mr. President?
Just, Mr. President, just to give you an idea, wala tayo sa slide. Ito. Wala sa slide. Just to give you an idea, Mr. President, in 2022, the number of letter of authority issued is about 51 million, Mr. President. Sorry, 51,000. The number of letter of authority. So meaning those individuals and corporations who BIR thinks are not declaring accurately, that's about 51,000, Mr. President. And those with final letters of demand, ano ba yan?
Yes. Then ito, no?
Ito.
Sir, 4,000.
Di, ano nga ito?
Ano pa lang to, sir? Final assessment.
Ito dapat
Ito,
na.
sir, 7.
Yeah. Those who, so they issued 51,000 LOAs. Out of those 51,000 LOAs, those with final assessment notices, the FAN, is about 4,500. And those who settled is about 854. We flashed it on the slide, Mr. President. So, in other words, not all 26 million taxpayers were found to have deficiencies. Out of the 26 million, 51,000 have been found deficiencies. And out of the 51,000, only 4,500 have been found with real deficiencies, Mr. President.
But when this bill becomes law, Mr. President, can the Filipino taxpayer ask for assistance from ONTA in filing returns, tax returns, Mr. President? With or without any problem from the BIR?
Yes, Mr. President. It's part of their information campaign. I think the objective is to reduce the potential for abuse and potential for corruption. So the ONTA's, part of the ONTA's job is to educate the public on filing the right amount, using the right basis, even physically filing the right returns.
Up
Mr.
to an individual taxpayer basis, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. But that will not be done, Mr. President, in the US, in their website, I went through it. They actually educate their taxpayers through, let's say, videos. And they teach the taxpayer what to fill up in their tax returns, Mr. President. So the taxpayer can go to those videos if they are not knowledgeable in filing their tax return. So those are the information drive that ONTA can do to educate the taxpayers, Mr. President.
But what's our intention, Mr. President, under Philippine law, Mr. President? Under this measure, what's our intention? That ONTA will also just assist the taxpayers by coming up with educational videos, or is it really the assistance felt by the taxpayer on the personal, individual level, Mr. President?
But Mr. President, in the bill, we didn't indicate the modality on how they will educate the taxpayers. We just indicated here they can assist the taxpayers through electronic means. For example, Mr. President, right now the chat bots are becoming very sophisticated. There's a program called ChatGPT that is super intelligent, no? And you can actually go there and ask anything you want. So the same application can be used by BIR for queries, Mr. President. If it's simple queries on how to fill up, how to compute, this type of technology can be used. But theoretically, Mr. President, yes, the taxpayer can go there physically and talk to an ONTA employee and ask questions, Mr. President.
Yes, and the question can be involving a form that the taxpayer filled up, and the question is, did I fill it up correctly?
Yes, Mr. President, as trivial as that,
Yes.
Mr. President. As
The
trivial as
potential
that.
clientele for ONTA, as far as BIR, so National Internal Revenue taxes are concerned, 28.7 million na po ang kanyang potential clientele. Wala pa tayo sa customs and sa local government.
Yes, Mr.
Tama po?
President. Tama po.
Okay.
Tama po, Mr. President.
So, ano pong manpower ang naiisip po natin sa ONTA, and then magkano po ang kanyang budget sa kanyang how to operate
Manpower.
the agency, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we ran some internal computation, Mr. President, in consultation with some agencies. And we're looking at 348 personnel to man ONTA initially. And the proposed budget is about 297 million, Mr. President. So this is the initial estimates that we have.
Magkano daw? Hindi, 48 personnel.
Ano yung budget?
Oo, magkano yung budget? Ako na kaagad.
Just to give you a comparison, Mr. President, the PAO has 2,400 employees of a budget of 5 billion pesos, Mr. President. So just to give some comparison, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, this is an idea worth pursuing, and we want this to succeed, Mr. President. Yun lang, medyo simulation
Yes,
tayo
Mr. President.
in our minds kung paano,
Mr.
given the number of clientele that,
Yeah.
kasi Section 8, found on page 7, the powers of the ONTA, letter A, assist the public in their tax queries and concerns relative to taxes. Wala na pong qualification
Clarification
po
is-
dyan. So that's really millions. And of course, if there is such a law, then I will, and this is about taxes. My taxes, although wala pang, let us say, no assessment from the BIR, but I want to file it correctly, and I don't want to pay a retainer anymore to an accountant to assist me. Siguro, ang pinakamababa ngayon, 10,000 a month ang retainer. So, I go to ONTA. So, ONTA must be ready to help me because yan ang nakasulat po rito sa function po niya.
Yes, Mr. President, you're absolutely correct. That was our concern also, Mr. President, with the huge number of taxpayers in our country. The extreme cases, everyone will be asking ONTA's help, no, in terms of their tax returns, Mr. President. So that's why we put that prioritization, no, so that ONTA can prioritize. But Mr. President, we're open to suggestions. Yeah.
I'd just like to point out that the prioritization is about representation.
Representation, Mr. President. Correct,
If
Mr.
we can
President.
revisit the idea, because one of the purposes of ONTA is actually to also increase and improve tax compliance.
Correct,
And
Mr.
here comes a
President.
taxpayer who wants to comply but has a question because I think His Honor will agree with this representation. Tax laws are complicated.
Yes, Mr. President.
The forms are also complicated. Kung tutuusin,
Yes.
complicated na sa abogado, how much more sa hindi pa nag 8 years sa kolehiyo, Mr. President. So we welcome. I think ONTA should welcome taxpayers consulting it so that they can perfect their findings.
Correct, Mr.
So
President.
28.7 million potential ano na po yun. Sa BIR pa lang po yun. At
Yes.
sa customs, ganun din po si importer. Ganun po ba? Si importer, pwede din pong humingi ng tulong.
Yes, Mr. President. Theoretically, Mr. President.
theoretically,
You're absolutely correct, Mr. President. And we're open to suggestions on how to manage expectations, Mr. President.
Can I ask for a minute suspension, Mr. President? Ano ulit?
Session is suspended. Shub.
Okay. So, before we suspended, Mr. President, we were talking about the budget for ONTA. Okay, so we want ONTA to be able to function properly. We want this concept to work, Mr. President. May matakbuhan talaga ang Filipino taxpayer para may counter-check kaagad sa BIR.
So with the indulgence of the minority
Yes.
leader, I'd like to ask the sponsor, how many is the initial personnel that would man ONTA?
Saan yung ONTA na budget? Yeah. Initially, Mr. President, 348 personnel will be assigned to ONTA with a budget of 297 million, Mr. President. These are just internal estimates based on the number of cases that we saw, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Just
Thank you,
wanted
Thank
it
you,
for the
Mr.
record.
President, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now we now go to the other main purpose of the bill, which is the enumeration of the taxpayers' basic rights. Does this measure grant these basic rights, Mr. President, or the measure only organizes and enumerates the basic rights, Mr. President?
Mr. President, the basic rights are already enshrined in various bills, even our Constitution, Mr. President, and also some from Supreme Court rulings, Mr. President. I have a slide for that, Mr. President, for easy reference. Slide 16. So just as an example, Mr. President, the right to information is already enshrined in our Constitution, the National Internal Revenue Code, revenue regulations also, Mr. President. Can you make it bigger? Yan. Some revenue regulation, Mr. President. The right to fair and faithful application of laws. It's also enshrined in our Constitution under the Bill of Rights. It's also part of the revenue regulation issued by BIR in various revenue regulation. So, Mr. President, in sum, the rights and also the obligations actually are already enshrined in a lot of our laws, and we're just codifying it through this proposal, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. Don't we face the danger that we might overlook some right or some obligation and we fail to restate it in the measure, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we conducted a public hearing and 5 technical working groups, Mr. President. We also invited tax experts, revenue collecting agencies to look at the rights, Mr. President. And so far, we did not receive any feedback from our experts as to if there are rights that we should include or rights that we should take a look at, Mr. President.
So, because if we overlooked an obligation and failed to mention it in this measure, but it is an obligation in existing law, what would be the effect, Mr. President? That obligation ceases to be an obligation, or it's still an obligation, Mr. President?
Well, the rights and obligation will still remain as right and obligation to be enforced through another law or through other laws, Mr. President. So in an event that we missed out a right or an obligation, that particular law or revenue regulation that is the basis of that missing right will be the basis to enforce that right, Mr. President.
Okay, but the sponsor guarantees to us today that because of the number of technical working group hearings made and the participation of a lot of tax experts, we are confident that we have not overlooked any right given to to our taxpayers,
Yeah.
as well as any obligation. I think we will be glad if an obligation is overlooked, Mr. President, but still that will remain an obligation, Mr. President. So kasi taxes are the lifeblood of the nation. Kailangan naman mag-cooperate din po tayo and participate. So I'm worried about the right, Mr. President. If we overlook a right, does that mean that the right does not exist, no longer exists, or is weakened, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, in section 4, line 27, this is page 2, we added a safeguard there. And let me just read, notwithstanding the rights and remedies of the taxpayers provided for in the National Internal Revenue Code, Customs Modernization and Tariff Act, the Local Government Code, and other regulations, issuance, and circulars, Mr. President. So, notwithstanding those rights, Mr. President, if we missed out any right or obligation, it can be still enforced, provided it's in those laws and in those regulations that were issued in the past, Mr. President.
Actually, Mr. President, that's my basic worry every time we merely restate what we claim to be already existing. Yun yung worry ko eh. If there is nothing new, then we introduce the danger that, our listing is not that complete. Yun po yung worry. Yun po yung worry ko. Unless there's something new, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, from what we gathered from the research, there is nothing new in the rights and obligations. All of them are present in various laws, especially the Internal Revenue Code of 1997, and it was amended subsequently, Mr. President. So based on our report and our exhaustive research, all the rights are covered by existing law, Mr. President.
So our measure, the measure under consideration, does not grant a new basic right to the taxpayer, and it does not impose a new obligation upon the taxpayer.
Yes, Mr. President, correct. We're not imposing anything new outside of existing laws right now, Mr. President.
And what would be the benefit, Mr. President, by enumerating the already granted rights? Although they are scattered in different laws, we will attempt to enumerate them in one measure as well as the taxpayers' obligation. What would be the benefit in this exercise, Mr. President?
But Mr. President, the same in the U.S. I read the literature on their Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and in the U.S. they codified it, no? Because the rights were scattered all over different laws and issuances as well. And the same purpose here in our proposal is to, number one, codify it. Number two, make it easier for the taxpayers to look at their rights in one glance, as opposed to looking at the Local Government Code, the NIRC, the CMTA, and other revenue issuance. So in this particular case, in one glance, they will see their rights and their obligations. And we also made it simple, Mr. President, to understand, because a lot of our taxpayers are not experts in filing their returns and expert in tax matters, Mr. President. So we in that sense, Mr. President, we made it also friendly to our taxpayers.
Thank you for that input, Mr. President. We've noticed, Mr. President, that the United States system, which we use as our model here, enumerates 10 basic rights for the taxpayers. Our measure enumerates 13 basic rights for the taxpayers. May we know where we overlapped with the U.S. Declaration of Basic Taxpayer Rights and what are these three additional rights that we are granting to Filipino taxpayers not expressly mentioned under the U.S. system, Mr. President?
Wala. Wala. This is not in PH.
Yes, then that is in PH, not in the news.
Mr. President, what's not in our proposal is the right to finality, the right to fair and just tax system, Mr. President. The other one is enshrined somewhere in our, it's more or less enshrined in the 13 rights as proposed in the measure, Mr. President.
So, of the 10 taxpayer rights in the United States, we have accommodated 8. We have not expressly provided for the
Yes.
right to finality and the right to a fair and just tax system.
Yes, Mr. President.
And our measure lists down 13 basic rights for the Filipino taxpayer. So, ano po yung pasobra natin? Ano yung dagdag po ng Philippine proposal over the U.S. existing system, Mr. President? Tapos, saka ko dagdag.
Mr. President,
Maganda rin ito. Sama na.
there are 5. The reason why it's more than 3 because some of them are not directly attributable to the right that we have stated in the proposal. So number 1 is right to fair and faithful application of laws. Number 2, right to present evidence and witness. Number 3, right to installment payment. Number 4, right to relief from paying interest and penalties. And then number 5 is right to recover cost and damages from judicial actions, Mr. President.
Yes, yes, Mr. President. Reading the U.S. List of taxpayer rights, this would not be clearly part of those listed by the United States, Mr. President. But when it comes to the two rights accorded to U.S. taxpayers, is His Honor open to accommodating the two rights? For example, the right to finality, which this representation finds to be a reasonable right to be extended to the Filipino taxpayer, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. We're open to make it expressly worded here in our proposal, Mr. President.
And then the other one is the right to a fair and just tax system, Mr. President, which I think the idea or the words we can accommodate, Mr. President, during if the sponsor is open to accommodating in the period of amendment. Maybe not as an additional independent right, but we can accommodate the wording into one of our listed rights, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. In my humble opinion, Mr. President, the second right in our proposal, the right to fair and faithful application of laws, can be interpreted as the right to fair and just tax system, Mr. President. However, if the good minority leader feels that those rights should be expressly provided in the proposal, Mr. President, we're very open to improving the bill, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, the
Expand.
right mentioned by our sponsor, which is enumerated in our draft bill, is the right to fair and faithful application of laws, of our, siguro yan, of our tax laws. So, which is actually guaranteed under our equal protection clause of the Constitution. Ito naman po is the overall tax system must be fair and just. I
Yes.
think that is the grant to the U.S. Taxpayer. So,
Yes.
at the proper time,
Yes, Mr. President.
we are considering an amendment, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. President, when I was just looking at the U.S., that particular right in the U.S. Bill of Taxpayers Bill of Rights, my personal interpretation is the laws create the system. So once the taxpayer is accorded fair and faithful application of the law, it is implied that you're also accorded with a fair and just tax system, Mr. President, because the system is created by the law. So that is my personal interpretation, Mr. President. But I'm open, Mr.
Yes,
President,
Mr.
to make it more explicit.
Yes, I would connect that second right that we are granting under
Yes.
the measure. That's the second right.
That's the second right.
That is, I think, this representation's interpretation and opinion, Mr. President, this would be more in connection with the Equal Protection
Yeah.
Clause, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will heed to the wisdom of our good minority leader who's a legal luminary of this August body, Mr. President. So I will heed to his suggestion, Mr. President.
Meaning to say, Mr. President, that if a certain taxpayer of a group of taxpayers or a critical mass of taxpayers believe that our tax system is unfair, not just, or maybe even unconstitutional, but by not following the directive in the Constitution that it must be, we must give priority to direct and progressive taxes, they can complain to the ONTA. And then the ONTA would be duty bound to make representation before policymakers, lawmakers, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President. I think a more important feature of the bill, Mr. President, since the rights and obligations are identified, this will flag the revenue authorities to embed all of these rights and obligations to the revenue regulation issuances, Mr. President. So the revenue regulation issuances will take into consideration these rights once we approve this into law. So all of the regulations should be compliant to the rights and obligations that we approve, Mr. President. So that's a very good feature, so that it's already built in with our revenue regulation to protect all of these rights. It should not be a process of going to the ONTA and complaining, but the revenue authorities will be embodying the rights that were approved by Congress through their issuances, Mr. President.
That's correct, Mr. President. The ONTA must, in due time, be able to persuade them to be champions.
Yes,
of the
Mr. President.
taxpayer rights, Mr. President.
Yeah.
So, and I anticipate the listing of the taxpayer rights will all be reproduced in all tax forms, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ulit dapat nakikita doon yun.
Correct, Mr. President. We actually included that in the bills,
Thank you
Mr.
for that,
President.
Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, more importantly, the job of the ONTA, Mr. President, is also to review all of the revenue regulations and to make sure that the revenue regulations are complied with the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, Mr. President. And that's within their power, no, to review, to recommend, either to amend the revenue regulations or the law itself, if necessary, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, since the meat actually of the measure is the listing of the taxpayers' basic rights, we need to go over the grant or the listing, if it's not a grant, or the listing of the basic rights one by one, Mr. President. So if I can ask for more time to conduct the interpellation, siguro just one more session if the sponsor does not mind. But we need to go over each
Yes.
and every right because I've noticed some qualifiers eh.
Yeah.
We grant a right, pero sabihin natin unless, except when, may mga ganun eh. So we have to understand what are these carved out
Qualifiers.
exceptions, Mr. President, or when is the right not to be invoked, Mr. President. So, kasi ito, in my opinion, this is really the meat, Mr. President. Otherwise, kung walang recognized basic taxpayer rights, kahit si ONTA, parang wala rin direksyon si ONTA, walang focus, Mr. President. So, we really have to agree on what are the basic Filipino taxpayers' rights are, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I agree. And I 100% agree that this is really the spirit of the law. And we are more than happy to go through with our minority leader the rights. And if there are unclear provisions or things that we can improve on, would be more than happy to listen to the suggestions and recommendations of our good minority leader.
We will just continue, Mr. President, with the interpellation because we want to make of record the exchange so that, in the future, if there is a case arising out of this bill, when it becomes law, the intention is clear, the meaning of the words is also clear, etc., Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
So,
President.
at this point, Mr. President, if I can request for the suspension of my interpellation, Mr. President.
The session suspended.
Suspended muna.
Walang.
Ay,
Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1806 under Committee Report number 20. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1594 under Committee Report number 14. This is the bill on One Town, One Product, OTOP Philippines Act of 2022.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we have sponsored the measure, and I now move to open the period of interpellations and debate and recognize the sponsor, the distinguished gentleman from Las Piñas City, Senator Mark Villar, and to interpellate our minority floor leader, Senator Coco Pimentel.
Thank
Our
you,
distinguished colleagues are recognized.
thank you, Mr. President, with the permission of our hardworking sponsor.
Yes, yes, thank you.
This representation would like to now start is supportive, Mr. President. This is a very supportive interpellation. Just maybe a few clarificatory questions, and also for the benefit of those who are of our constituents or citizens who are following what is happening here in the Senate. At least there is something to be excited about, Mr. President, a program like OTOP. As I understand it, Mr. President, OTOP, which is the acronym for One Town, One Product, is already an existing program of the DTI. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, that is correct. It is an existing, but to further strengthen and give it more, to give it budget and to give it more teeth, we have this bill to further support the program and make it institutionalized.
So, Mr. President, in the 2023 budget, I think OTOP already has a budget. May we know what is the budget for OTOP for 2023?
Mr. President, the budget for OTOP was 97 million. Is 97 million, more or less.
Yes, more. And then, is 97 million pesos for 2023 larger than the amount given to OTOP in 2022, Mr. President?
By how much? Less. How much was it? It is less.
Less? Okay, so.
It's less, from 102 to approximately 102 to 97, Mr. President.
So that supports one of the purposes of the measure, Mr. President, which is to really support and enhance the program. Pababa pala yung budget niya eh. Do we know the reason, Mr. President, why Congress cut the budget for OTOP?
Any particular reason? Was it reduced or was it that was in the net? There was no particular reason given, but perhaps, I guess I will leave that to the, I guess the wisdom of Congress on the budget, but slightly less, although it wasn't much less, but slightly less than the year before.
Because maganda naman po ang maganda naman po ang reputasyon ng OTOP actually, and can we say that this is one of the flagship programs of the DTI?
Yes, we can say this is one of the flagship projects of the DTI. They're very supportive of this bill, and they feel that this is one of the bills that can bring development to our countryside. And we find that very appealing because it supports the MSMEs, particularly in the provinces, because, as you know, because it's one town, one product. Precisely, it creates, gives support to these manufacturers who are in other outlying areas or in provincial areas.
What is the mechanism, Mr. President? How is the town supposed to identify the one product that it can register under the OTOP program? Is it strict, sir, that only one product can be registered by a town, or they can register more than one product?
Well, the LGU will work with the DTI in order to identify which is the product. Is it actually one or two? Pwede naman two.
22.
Up to two products. Up to two products. Products and services, yes.
Services.
So and there are certain guidelines that are given, very general guidelines, of course, such as potential, which is the potential market growth for the product. There's the promise, which is the MSME's level of commitment. Of course, they have, that's for choosing the entrepreneurs. But in terms of criteria for the OTOP, you have the culture, the cultural values of the area. You have the community resources. What are the resources in the community that can support the product? Of course, creativity. They want to leverage the creativity of the area. And of course, competitive advantage and connection. So these are the general criteria that is given under the bill to decide what products can be given the one town, one product support.
Did this honor mention the locally available materials or resources?
Yes, community resources. So,
Community resources,
yes. It can be identified on the basis of locally available materials, raw materials, skills, network of resources with the communities.
How autonomous, Mr. President, are our LGUs in identifying the OTOP product or service that they want, Mr. President?
Well, of course, they're given a lot of say. Obviously, they know much. They know much their local advantages, probably much more than the national. But nevertheless, the DTI will still support and also give their inputs. But of course, the LGUs are at the forefront of this campaign, as they will be the ones to set up the OTOP office locally.
This has been an ongoing program of the DTI. May we know how long has this auto program been in existence, Mr. President?
It was it's been almost 20 about 20 years. It's been ongoing for 20 years.
For 20 years. So the lack of a law, has that been a hindrance or obstacle, Mr. President?
Well, of course, when the program is in law, in terms of budgeting, it means under the law, it has to be given a budget, in yearly budget. So of course, that gives it more weight in the budgetary process.
Has there ever been an instance where the LGU and the DTI had a difference as to what should be that auto product or service?
Ever been on? In general, of course, the DTI gives their input, but of course, in the end, it's the LGU that will be followed.
The answer is very welcome, Mr. President. So we respect local autonomy.
Yes.
Mr. President, the definition of terms mentions large enterprises. Are we consistent with the existing definition of what a large enterprise is, yung hindi na MSME?
100 million. 100 million. Oo nga, is that consistent? Tapos andito, sabi mo na hindi siya covered.
Okay. Yes, that's based on the Magna Carta of Magna Carta of MSMEs.
We retained.
Yes.
Retained. So no change in the definition. And then we are really making it clear that this act, the OTOP Act, shall not cover the large enterprises. So meaning to say, whatever benefits under OTOP would be reserved for our micro, small, and the medium enterprises.
Yes, yes, that is correct, Mr. President. The primary focus of this bill is really to support our MSMEs, particularly in the countryside.
Yes. And then what would be the benefits, Mr. President, para marinig po ng ating mga kababayan na excited na ring magnegosyo?
Yes, in terms of product support, one, there's an office that will be created in the LGU, and there will also be coordination with the LTFRB and the PPA to put up OTOP centers. Is it centers? Yeah, OTOP centers where the products of these OTOPs can be sold. At the same time, the beneficiaries will also be given assistance from the DTI and the LGU in their product design, which involves the design of their product lines, packaging and labeling, technology updating, and the product enhancement. So, and of course, they'll also be assisted in market compliance, market access, product promotion, and capacity building. So the expertise of the DTI will be used in order to give more benefits to these one-town, one-product MSMEs.
And then 20 years na po natin itong binibigay. Tama po ba?
That is
So-
correct. That is correct, Mr. President.
So we must have siguro naman we must have some anong tawag mo doon? Testimonials ba yan? Ang tawag mo doon yung mga positive feedback, Mr. President.
Yes, we do have a lot of,
have a lot.
but if we could, we can submit to the, Mr. President, we can submit to the body some of these,
Sana oo.
yeah, what's this?
Sana, Mr. President, if
Yes.
DTI could organize all of these, ano ba tawag mo dito? Positive stories or success stories, Mr. President. Maybe in a magazine, booklet form, or a video presentation para makita po natin yung mga sino yung mga nag-succeed para ma-inspire po yung mga future generation of entrepreneurs.
Yes, Mr. President, we will definitely promote, and of course, we will share these stories, which there are many, actually. I was told that there are very numerous cases of a successful what they call autopreneurs.
Entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Tama po yun. So, is there a town, Mr. President, which made OTAP its auto product, Mr. President? I'm asking this question just to lighten the,
Well,
the
Mr.
exchange, Mr. President.
Yes, actually, there was in region, well, as we know, Region 7. So, san pa? Kung hindi Region 7. So,
So,
there was OTAP was actually
An auto product.
an auto
Yes,
product.
okay. May we know the town map, Mr. President?
Car,
Car Cebu. Good.
Cebu.
Which is also known for
Lechon.
chicharon.
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 So ganun po 'yun ano. So I think meron meron ding opinion na baka daw makahon yung isang munisipyo, isang lugar sa isang produkto marami naman siyang capacities na iba-iba. So how do we answer such
It doesn't, I think, Mr. President, yes.
such a point, Mr.
It
President?
does not limit the products that can be, of course, there's no limit as to what products can be marketed or what entrepreneurs want to do in their respective areas. But of course, this is just designed so that they can identify certain products and give them additional support because these products already have existing advantages that they feel that they can compete even internationally. So, I mean, it's really more of a support to certain products, but does not take away from other. So the idea na makakahon, hindi naman po totoo dahil marami namang produkto. Ito lang, medyo bigyan lang natin ng focus yung mga produkto na meron, bibigyan na ng focus yung mga produkto na may existing advantage.
Can I ask the specific situation of Karkar, Cebu? So for example, OTAP versus Chicharon, what product is under OTAP for Karkar?
No, but is it existing? Both are
May meron akong point.
Okay. Both are existing. So both are existing simultaneously. So they're not mutually exclusive. But
Okay, so
like I said,
yeah.
there's
So pwede nga natin sabihin that the success of Karkar in producing, marketing, and trading OTAP as well as their chicharon have been assisted by the auto program of the DTI.
yes, definitely we
So,
can
ganun,
we can
okay.
say that,
Okay, so hindi nga.
Mr. President.
So is it possible that did the DTI really limit it to 2 products? Or are there towns that with more than 2 products?
There are towns with more than 2 products. There are towns with more, because of course the DTI supports all products. I mean, it's not in the law that we will limit the support. But definitely, we want to identify certain products that are, I guess, symbolic in some way or have some advantage in a particular area, and that's what we want to help promote also. So
Sige.
it's in addition to.
Yes, for as long as yung mga criteria mentioned kanina, they promotes the culture and then uses local products, they can do more with less. We will encourage the LGU to enter into the production or the trading in that product or service. And there is really no limit. It's just in the name of the program.
There's
is that
only, of course, the DTA has to identify some products to give
Yes.
for the one town one product. But certainly, this doesn't mean that there will be any reduction in support to other products. But definitely, I think it's important that there are certain products that we identify, because there are really certain products that are the area is known for, or it has some competitive advantage, or culturally it's known for that. And those are the products that we want to promote, because these are the products that they might be able to sell not just nationally but internationally.
Yes, we know, Mr. President, that the DTI would extend support. Ang question ko lang is, for those extra products or services, is the support coming from the auto program or some other program of the DTI? Para lang mas maintindihan po natin yung purpose for the auto program.
Yeah. Yung ibang, is it coming from auto or they can come from?
Especially for the training. For potential products.
I think for potential, Mr. President, for potential products, the DTI gives support. It's not necessarily, when you say it's even if it's not part of the auto program, they can still give support, the same kind of support to other products in the area. So
Yes.
it's not limiting.
Yes, that's the support for trade and industry,
Yes.
entrepreneurship, and of course. So thank you for that input, Mr. President. And then maybe just a few more points, Mr. President. Section 11, page 5, is very clear that the DTI shall serve as the lead agency. So congratulations for that, Mr. President. This time talagang klaro tayo, DTI. But then there's an enumeration of, ilan ba ito? 5, 10, around 12, 13 other agencies, Mr. President. What are the roles of these 13 enumerated agencies, Mr. President? Ang takot ko baka magkaroon tayo ng conflict or turf war, Mr. President.
I don't think. I think it will be more of to make them aware of the OTOP and make them available to give assistance should it be needed. So it's not really in the form of a committee or something that might become a source of red tape or otherwise. I think these agencies that were identified are just agencies that can be tapped.
Can be
Should
tapped.
assistance be needed.
That's why, Mr. President, letter K of that enumeration, which is the Philippine International Trading Corporation. Napaka-powerful actually nitong agency na ito, but yet it's not really top of mind when you think about the important agencies of government. Again, top of mind pa nga siya as a parking area for funds. So, can we give an example of how PITC can be of assistance to the DTI in the implementation of the auto program, Mr. President?
In the field of marketing, Mr. President, I think in the field of marketing, the PITC can be of assistance, seeing as how they also they have experience in doing that, and they also have resources that can assist in the marketing of these products.
In the international, the marketing in the international market, Mr. President?
Because also as a procurement agency, Mr. President, the PITC can also keep in mind that some of these auto products can be utilized for certain requirements in the future. So they can also help in that regard when it comes to connecting producers to potential markets, because they're a procuring entity.
Markets abroad.
even locally, they
Even
do
locally.
procure for government. So if there are products that are locally made, auto products can be also on top of their mind.
Sige, I hope the PITC would really be a more relevant agency, Mr. President, nowadays, Mr. President. So siguro, Mr. President, my last concern would be just the selection of the beneficiaries. Paano natin maiwasan yung politika po rito? Because I think it will be the voice or the choice of the LGU which will be controlling, Mr. President. So how will we choose the beneficiaries of the auto program, and how do we ensure that it will be based on merit, potential, and promise of
Yes.
the enterprise, Mr.
Well,
President?
it's in the law. The qualifications are enumerated in the law. And actually, they go into even more specifics. And these were established by the DTI, and they're consistent. Like, for instance, when you say culture, this shall pertain to, this quoting from the bill, this shall pertain to cultural values rooted in the following: heritage, living traditions, customs and rituals, recipes passed on from generation, narratives, history, and beliefs. And if you're talking about community resource, for instance, the
Is it an emergency or?
is there an emergency in the? Anyway, sorry.
Okay.
When you're talking about community resource, the locality selected products shall be based on the availability of local resources, raw materials, skills, and network resources within a community. So there are at least 5 C's that are enumerated in the law as qualifications for the OTOP. So the DTI will work with the LG to make sure that these are followed, and hopefully we want to shield, by having this provision, we hope to shield the OTOP law from politics or undue influence.
Section 9 is about beneficiaries, Mr. President, and I think it lacks, in the personal opinion, Mr. President, my personal opinion, it lacks guidance as to how the beneficiaries are to be identified, Mr. President. So maybe at the proper time, if we can come up with language which is tighter,
Yes.
so that we can clearly identify who will name the beneficiaries and what would they be possessing. So that they qualified to be beneficiaries, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I think we can do that especially in the implementing rules and regulations. We can be much more concise, and we can give a much more detailed set of requirements so as to make the choice of which auto products much more analytical.
But Mr. President, is the sponsor open to making the law more specific or clearer, Mr. President?
Yes. We are open to that, Mr. President.
Ayaw natin sa IRR mapunta. If we can do it at
Yes.
this level, why not, Mr. President?
Yes, we are open to that, Mr. President.
So on that, ano ba? So we are receiving information, Your Honor, that OTAP is the product of Liloan.
Liloan.
Liloan. So reklamo ng Liloan, Liloan OTAP daw. So their town is identified with that product, under OTOP, which is OTAP, Mr. President.
My sources from the DTI may have been, I will confer with my resources from the DTI. There are numerous, there's so many towns, Mr. President,
Okay.
that I will have to confirm this.
Siguro nga ganon. It may also be a product of Karkar, but also
Liloan.
it can be an auto product of another town. Wala namang exclusivity. So, but on that positive note, Mr. President, where our sponsor expressed his openness for language which will help clarify the identification of the beneficiaries, na hopefully bawasan natin ng politika, because this is really about trade, industry, commerce, entrepreneurship. So I hope, I know our local governments will understand. Gusto rin naman nila ito, I'm sure, na on the merits lang po tayo. So on that positive note, Mr. President, I'd like to terminate my interpellation and congratulate our sponsor for a job well done. The bill at least is clear as to the lead agency. Yun lang naman iniiwasan natin yung magkakagulo pa sa paggawa ng IRR. It's really the DTI, which is the lead agency. But then when it comes into conflict with the LGU, they give way to the LGU's decision because the LGU knows the locality better than the DTI, Mr. President. So congratulations to our sponsor, and we look forward to the success, Mr. President. More successful na OTOP actually. More successes for the OTOP program. So thank you.
Strengthening the
Thank you,
program.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
That's why he's Dr. Mark Villar. He's Doctor of Love. I'm just, we can strike that out. Anyway, yes, Majority Leader.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. President. And before we close the
Pwede man i-close period of interpretation.
close ko lang yung interpellation. Pero
Yeah.
hindi na amendment. Mr. President, just one last thing, Mr. President, before we close the period of interpellations and debate. You know, I'm an author of this measure. I've been espousing this measure for quite a long time, Mr. President. In my first term in the House of Representatives, when one town, one product was introduced, and we feel that we need to do more and improve what we are doing. And just to establish, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor, just to establish the fact that we are not in any way yung kinukulong na idea, no, Mr. President, because a lot of LGUs are also asking this representation. Una, hindi naman po isang produkto lang. And pangalawa, any product. Kaya nga, nagbibiruan kanina, OTAP pwede rin kasi any product. But at the same time, Mr. President, just one question just to strengthen our position na hindi kinukulong, Mr. President. For example, may isang town, gusto mong palitan yung produkto, you can still do that. Is that correct, Your Honor? And can you...
Yes, of course, of course.
Can
I
you
mean-
explain further how to deal with that when a town wanted to replace his product, Mr. President? They're allowed to do that, and they're still part of the OTOP program.
Yes, there's certain, Mr. President, there's some criteria that's laid out in the law, and as long as those products fulfill those criteria, the LGU has the option or the ability to change which products are under the OTOP. So
Yes, as long as they fall under the 5 Cs, if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken. No? So again, Mr. President, we are not in any way creeping into the powers given to our LGUs na makukulong po sila or mapo-force sila na itong produkto lang sila. So with that, Mr. President, I'm glad to move that considering that there are no other member who wishes to interpellate or ask any questions on this particular measure, I move that we close the period of interpellations and debate. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved. May I just ask the Majority Floor Leader, what is your OTOP in Baliwag? No, sorry.
Bukawi.
In Bukawi.
There's a
Is
lot,
it
Mr.
firecrackers?
President. I'm sure Bukawi is a pyrotechnics capital of the Philippines. I'm sure you're also aware of our famous butcheron, Mr. President.
Oh, my goodness. It
Yeah.
increased my cholesterol level.
Senator Sani Angara is our model, Mr. President. Butcheron model.
How about Las Piñas? May I ask the sponsor what the one town, one product of Las Piñas is? Good question. Is it the question that is difficult to answer?
Las Piñas, we have we are famous for making our parol and of course some of our native products. So yeah, Mr.
You have a very good, although it's not a product, but your bamboo organ. Is it still being
Yes,
highlighted?
it's still a source of, although hindi naman siya one town, one product, but I invite you to visit the bamboo organ. We're very proud. It's an international attraction. So
If the
we're
good
very-
sponsor has a concert there, I know the mother,
Yes, yes.
our very own Cynthia Villar has usually has concerts there
Yes,
for the
yes,
bamboo
yes.
organ. Please invite us. I would love to see that.
Yes, we have a bamboo
Would like to
organ, and we of course we have our festivals, the Water Lily Festival and the of course, we have Parol Festival. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sponsor.
Basta daw pag may tiyaga, may nilaga, Mr. President.
May
Sipag at
tiyaga,
tiyaga.
may nilaga.
Sipag at tiyaga.
at tiyaga.
Well, with that, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1594 under Committee Report number 14, the One Town, One Product Philippines Act of 2022. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Yes, Mr. President, we have two measures up for final approval on second reading tomorrow. And we will do that first thing in the afternoon. Mr. President, at this juncture, some administrative matters, and upon the request of the chairperson of the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Senator Amy Marcos, in her letter dated March 13, 2023, and with the consent of the body, I move that Senate Bill number 1602 under Committee Report number 16 be withdrawn and returned to the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development and Finance. The committees must reconsider the bill in view of the various social pension funds already provided for by the government, including the numerous new proposals that require systematic consolidation. I so move, Mr. President.
Do you know the title of the bill, Your Honor? Just curious.
It's done here, Mr. President. I don't have the title of the bill.
was just
but
curious.
It's
We can ask later. No
yeah,
worries.
and it's about the different
there
various
be-
social pension funds, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
there be no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the consent of the body and conformity of Senator Grace Poe, I move that Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr. be made co-author of Senate Bill number 1121 or the Philippine Transportation Safety Board Act. So move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, and with the consent of Senator Bong Revilla Jr., I move that Senator Grace Poe be made co-author of Senate Bill number 1964 or the Kabalikat sa Pagtuturo Act. So move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 18 of the Rules of the Senate and with the conformity of the chairperson of the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Grace Poe, may I manifest for the record the inclusion of Senate Bill number 1987. This is the Comprehensive Infrastructure Development Master Plan Act in the same subcommittee for Comprehensive Infrastructure Development Master Plan with Senator J.V. Ejercito as chairperson. I so manifest, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion, manifestation is noted. The session suspended
President, with the permission of the body, and today is such a fruitful day, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, March 14, 2023.
There being no objection to the motion, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock for afternoon, Tuesday, March 14, 2023. Have a good evening, everyone.